May 1966. The Phuoc Tuy jungle breathes thick and wet at 85% humidity. 6 Australian soldiers slip through knee-deep undergrowth at 1.5 kilometers per hour, slower than most people walk. Above them, American helicopters thunder past at 120 knots, fast insertions, quick kills, faster extractions. That's how special operations works in Vietnam. Get in, hit hard, get out before the enemy responds. But Captain Mac McConnell's patrol moves like ghosts, dwelling for 72 hours in places other units won't stay for 72 minutes. The enemy starts calling them Ma Rung, phantoms of the jungle. Then the bounty leaflets appear. $5,000 for each Australian head, dead or alive. In a war where speed is survival, why would anyone choose to move this slow? And why would the North Vietnamese put a price tag that high on soldiers they claim they never see? The numbers told a story that defied every assumption about small unit warfare in Southeast Asia. In roughly 6 years of deployment in Vietnam from April 1966 to October 1971, 580 men of the Special Air Service Regiment of Australia conducted nearly 1,200 long-range reconnaissance patrols behind enemy lines. They reported enemy casualties of roughly 492 killed, 106 possibly killed, 47 wounded, 10 possibly wounded, and 11 prisoners captured, while their own losses were 1 killed in action, 1 died of wounds, 3 accidental deaths, 1 missing, and 1 death from illness, with 28 wounded. The mathematics seemed impossible, a casualty exchange rate that belonged in textbooks, not jungle warfare. The enemy had a name for them, Ma Rung, the phantoms of the jungle. But behind those numbers lay a question that gnawed at conventional military thinking. How did a small force of only a few hundred men operating in dense jungle in teams of 4 to 6 soldiers achieve such a remarkable record? And more intriguingly, did the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong truly place bounties of $5,000 per Australian SAS soldier, dead or alive? The claims circulated through intelligence reports and after-action summaries, whispered in base camps from Nui Dat to Long Bin, but the archival proof remained frustratingly thin. The tension between myth and mechanism would define everything that followed. It was early April 1966 when the war in South Vietnam began expanding at a pace that left planners scrambling to adapt. American forces had surged past 200,000 troops, their helicopters creating a constant thunder that rolled across the countryside day and night. Artillery batteries pounded suspected enemy positions with mechanical precision, turning vast swaths of jungle into moonscapes of splintered trees and cratered earth. In this climate of overwhelming firepower and industrial scale warfare, Australia deployed its elite SAS squadrons into the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone, particularly targeting the provinces of Phuoc Tuy, Bien Hoa, and Long Con. Captain Mac McConnell, 28 years old, lean from jungle rations, with eyes that tracked movement like a hunter, represented everything the conventional special operations community thought they understood about Vietnam. He had transferred into the SAS in 1965 after cutting his teeth on anti-insurgency operations in Borneo, where the rules of engagement were clearer and the enemy more predictable. When he arrived in Vietnam, the accepted wisdom among Allied special operations units was carved in stone. Insert by helicopter at maximum speed, move quickly to the target, strike hard with overwhelming firepower, then withdraw before the enemy could mass forces for a counterattack. Speed was survival. Hesitation was death. But McConnell and his squad began questioning everything they had been taught. What if the fundamental assumptions were wrong? What if instead of racing through enemy territory like a brush fire, they inserted even deeper behind enemy lines, moved slower than conventional doctrine allowed, stayed longer than anyone thought safe, and became invisible? What if they could turn the jungle itself into their operational domain and force the enemy to fight on terms that favored patience over speed, stealth over firepower? The first test came in May 1966. A 6-man SAS patrol loaded into a UH-1 Iroquois helicopter as the sun climbed over the South China Sea, casting long shadows across the rice paddies and rubber plantations of Phuoc Tuy province. The helicopter pilot, following standard insertion protocol, brought them in at treetop height, the rotor wash bending bamboo stalks and sending clouds of red dust swirling through the cabin. The landing zone was 10 kilometers behind what intelligence officers optimistically called the front line, though in Vietnam, front lines existed more in the imagination than on any meaningful map. The patrol established an observation post overlooking a suspected Viet Cong supply trail, a narrow path worn into the jungle floor by countless sandaled feet and bicycle wheels loaded with rice, ammunition, and medical supplies. For 72 hours, they remained motionless, watching, listening, recording the patterns of enemy movement. Their radio operator maintained contact with base headquarters through scheduled transmissions, his whispered reports painting a picture of enemy logistics that conventional reconnaissance flights could never capture. When a column of 20 Viet Cong fighters moved down the trail just after midnight on the second day, the patrol called in helicopter gunships with surgical precision. The UH-1B gunships arrived like mechanical hornets, their door-mounted M60 machine guns chattering at 750 rounds per minute, forcing the enemy column to scatter into the undergrowth. The extraction came exactly as planned. The same UH-1 Iroquois settling into a clearing barely large enough for its rotor disc, while the patrol sprinted from the jungle with their equipment and intelligence. They had not fired a single shot from their own weapons. They had not been detected by the enemy. They had not suffered a single casualty. The mechanism appeared to work with clockwork precision. The jungle had become an Allied observation advantage, a sensor network that could direct firepower with devastating accuracy. McConnell's squad returned to base flushed with success, convinced they had discovered the pattern that would define their war. Slow, methodical infiltration combined with persistent observation and precision strikes could generate effects far beyond their numbers. The jungle, they believed, could be transformed from enemy sanctuary into Allied hunting ground. Speed might win battles, but patience could win wars. But the jungle of Vietnam had its own lessons to teach, and by June 1966, those lessons would arrive written in blood and friendly fire, forcing McConnell to confront the possibility that innovation and conventional doctrine were about to collide in ways that would change everything he thought he knew about warfare. McConnell's squad deployed into the Hat Ditch Zone in late 1966, with a methodology that would have seemed suicidal to conventional forces. The Hat Dich, a sprawling expanse of dense jungle in western Phuoc Tuy province, served as a crucial infiltration corridor for North Vietnamese forces moving south toward Saigon. Intelligence reports described it as a hornet's nest of enemy activity, crisscrossed with supply trails, dotted with ammunition caches, and defended by battalions of seasoned fighters who knew every vine and creek bed. The UH-1 Iroquois helicopter inserted McConnell's team at a landing zone 8 kilometers inside the enemy-controlled zone, the pilot maintaining his nerve just long enough for 6 men to leap from the cabin before banking hard and disappearing over the canopy. From that moment, the patrol moved through the jungle at 1.5 kilometers per hour, slower than most people walked on city sidewalks. Every step was calculated, every sound analyzed, every shadow examined for signs of enemy presence. They rarely used beaten paths, instead pushing through knee-deep undergrowth that soaked their uniforms with humidity and left their skin crawling with leeches. The tactical doctrine McConnell had developed defied every principle taught in conventional military schools. While other special forces units inserted fast, struck hard, and extracted within hours, his patrol established listening posts at 1,000-meter intervals along known enemy infiltration routes and remained in position for days. Each man carried a 15-kilogram pack loaded with 3 liters of water, enough rations for 72 hours, a Claymore directional mine, for emergency defense, and radio equipment that maintained contact with artillery batteries and helicopter gunships orbiting beyond the horizon. Their weapons reflected the precision over firepower philosophy that governed their operations. McConnell carried an M16 rifle set to semi-automatic fire, conserving ammunition and avoiding the distinctive sound signature of full automatic bursts that could compromise their position. His designated marksman carried an L1A1 SLR for long-range engagements, while the squad's machine gunner shouldered an M60 general-purpose machine gun with 500 rounds of linked ammunition. Each rifleman carried 140 rounds for his primary weapon, enough for sustained contact but light enough for extended movement through dense terrain. The hot ditch zone presented unique challenges that tested every aspect of their methodology. Operating at elevations between 1,000 and 1,200 feet above sea level, the patrol encountered humidity levels that rarely dropped below 85%, turning every piece of equipment into a breeding ground for rust and mold. They moved during 2 narrow windows each day, from 4 in the morning until 9 when the jungle mist provided concealment, and again from 3 in the afternoon until 7 in the evening, when shifting shadows made detection difficult. During the blazing heat of midday and the dangerous darkness after nightfall, they remained motionless in carefully camouflaged positions. The intelligence they began producing transformed how Allied forces understood enemy operations in the region. From their concealed observation posts, McConnell's patrol identified supply dumps that conventional reconnaissance had missed, tracked the movement patterns of enemy units, and provided targeting coordinates for helicopter gunships with surgical precision. The UH-1B gunships would arrive at ranges of 3/4 to 1 mile, their M134 miniguns delivering 6,000 rounds per minute in devastating 3-minute bursts that left enemy formations shattered and demoralized. By mid-1968, McConnell's squad had completed 28 patrols without suffering a serious casualty, a record that bordered on the miraculous in a war where Special Forces units typically measured their effectiveness in months rather than years. Their most successful engagement occurred on May 23, 1968, when 2 Viet Cong sappers attempted to cross a trail that the patrol had been monitoring for 36 hours. At 23:45 hours, as the enemy soldiers moved through the killing zone with confident steps that suggested they believed themselves safe, McConnell triggered a claymore mine positioned 30 meters from their location. The explosion lit the jungle like daylight for 3 seconds. The 700 steel balls packed into the mine's curved face, shredding vegetation and flesh with equal efficiency. Before the eye, echo faded. The squad's M60 machine gunner swept the trail with controlled bursts, his tracers drawing red lines through the smoke and cordite haze. The patrol's radio operator later estimated 2 to 3 enemy killed, though confirmation proved impossible in the chaos that followed. Within minutes, they had withdrawn from their positions, moving through predetermined escape routes while enemy reinforcements stumbled through the darkness toward the sound of gunfire. The extraction at Kangaroo Pad occurred at 04:15, the UH-1 Iroquois settling onto the landing zone with its engines screaming and rotor wash flattening the elephant grass. McConnell's patrol sprinted from the tree line with their equipment and wounded pride intact, having demonstrated once again that patience and precision could achieve what brute force could not. The patrol leader's after-action report contained a single line that would become legendary among SAS veterans. "They didn't see us until the blast." Headquarters took notice of what the numbers were telling them. By late 1968, Australian and New Zealand SAS units had completed nearly 1,000 patrols throughout South Vietnam, maintaining casualty ratios that defied statistical probability. The enemy had begun altering their supply routes, abandoning trails that had been used for years, and implementing security measures that suggested genuine concern about the invisible watchers in the jungle. Intelligence reports confirmed that Viet Cong and North Vietnamese units had begun referring to the Australian soldiers as phantoms, spirits that struck without warning and vanished without trace. McConnell felt vindicated in his belief that methodology could triumph over doctrine. His approach was working, the enemy was reacting, and the jungle had indeed become their battlefield. This moment of confidence, when everything seemed to align perfectly with his vision of how small unit warfare should be conducted, represented the peak of what conventional military thinking might achieve through innovation and adaptation. But the war in Vietnam had a way of punishing success, and the enemy was learning lessons of their own. Promotion came to McConnell in early 1969 with the weight of expectations that would transform both his responsibilities and the nature of the war he was fighting. As troop leader, he now commanded multiple patrols operating across a broader area of operations, and headquarters had assigned his expanded unit to the Long Con region, a mountainous expanse northeast of Saigon, where enemy formations had grown larger, more sophisticated, and considerably more dangerous than anything they had encountered in Phuoc Thai province. The terrain shift presented immediate challenges that tested every assumption about their proven methodology. Long Khan's elevations reached 2,000 feet above sea level, creating a landscape of steep ridges separated by valleys carved, with creek crossings every 300 meters. The constant water movement had turned the jungle floor into an ankle-deep quagmire of red mud that sucked at boots and made silent movement nearly impossible. Bamboo thickets grew so dense that visibility dropped to 10 meters in many areas, forcing the patrol to navigate by compass bearing and dead reckoning rather than visual landmarks. More concerning than the terrain was the enemy they now faced. Intelligence reports described North Vietnamese and Viet Cong units operating in company strength, formations of 120 to 150 fighters supported by engineers who had constructed elaborate tunnel complexes and reinforced bunker systems. These were not the small groups of lightly armed guerrillas that McConnell's patrol had stalked in the Hat Ditch zone. These were professional soldiers with heavy weapons, sophisticated communications, and the tactical discipline that came from years of fighting French colonial forces and American military advisors. The enemy had adapted their own methodology in response to the phantom-like Australian patrols. Punji stakes, sharpened bamboo spears coated with human waste and designed to penetrate boot soles, appeared along previously safe infiltration routes. Booby traps constructed from unexploded American artillery shells and triggered by tripwires began claiming casualties among Allied reconnaissance units. Most significantly, enemy forces had established their own listening posts at key terrain features, creating an early warning network that could detect helicopter insertions from kilometers away. McConnell's patrol adapted with innovations that pushed the boundaries of what small unit tactics could achieve in hostile terrain. They reduced their movement intervals to 150 meters between team members, creating a formation that could respond to contact while maintaining the stealth that had become their trademark. Night vision starlight scopes, primitive light amplification devices that resembled telescopes mounted on rifle stocks, expanded their operational envelope beyond 1930 hours for the first time in the war. The technology was experimental, prone to failure in humid conditions, and required batteries that added weight to already heavy packs, but it provided a crucial advantage in the darkness that had previously belonged exclusively to the enemy. Their most successful engagement in Long Khan demonstrated how technology and tactics could combine to devastating effect. A patrol positioned at 900 feet elevation on a ridge overlooking a major supply route observed a company of approximately 120 North Vietnamese engineers working to construct a new trail through a valley floor. The enemy soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, cutting trees with cross-cut saws and hauling logs with block and tackle systems that suggested permanent construction rather than temporary bypass routes. Their discipline and organization indicated they expected to control this territory for months or years to come. At 02:13 hours on a moonless night in October 1969, McConnell's radio operator established contact with a pair of UH-1B gunships orbiting 15 kilometers to the south. The helicopters approached at minimum altitude, their pilots using terrain masking to avoid detection by enemy listening posts equipped with sound direction finding equipment. Each gunship carried door-mounted M60 machine guns capable of delivering 750 rounds per minute, and their combined firepower could saturate a target area with 4,000 rounds in 3 minutes of concentrated fire. The attack began with mechanical precision. Tracers drew red lines through the darkness as both gunships rolled into firing runs that bracketed the enemy worksite, their machine guns chattering in overlapping fields of fire that left no escape routes. The North Vietnamese engineers scattered into the underbrush, abandoning their tools and half-completed construction as the helicopters made multiple passes over the target area. Secondary explosions suggested that ammunition or fuel had been stored near the work site, creating fireballs that illuminated the valley floor and revealed the extent of the enemy construction project. McConnell's patrol extracted at 0445 without firing a single round from their own weapons, their mission accomplished through coordination rather than direct engagement. The enemy construction project had been destroyed. The engineer unit had suffered casualties that intelligence later estimated at 15 to 20 killed or wounded, and the supply route would remain unusable for weeks while enemy forces cleared debris and established new security measures. The success reinforced McConnell's belief that his methodology could adapt to changing conditions and increasingly sophisticated enemy tactics. The mechanism still functioned under pressure. Enemy forces continued to be suppressed, and his men remained confident in their ability to dominate terrain that conventional wisdom declared uncontrollable. But success in Vietnam had a way of attracting attention from headquarters, and attention from headquarters inevitably led to demands for expanded operations that tested the limits of what small units could accomplish. The Pentagon and Australian Task Force headquarters had been studying the SAS success rates with growing interest and mounting pressure to scale up operations. If six-man patrols could achieve such remarkable results, conventional thinking suggested, then larger formations could achieve proportionally greater effects. The mathematics seemed simple, but mathematics had never adequately described the complexity of jungle warfare, and the demands for higher tempo operations would soon collide with the patient methodology that had made the phantoms of the jungle so effective against an enemy. That was learning to hunt the hunters. The pressure from above arrived in late 1969 with the weight of institutional momentum that had crushed innovative thinking throughout military history. Pentagon analysts had been studying Australian SAS casualty reports with the kind of enthusiasm that bureaucrats reserve for statistics that made their superiors look competent. If small patrols could achieve remarkable results, their logic concluded, then larger formations operating at higher tempo could achieve proportionally greater effects. The mathematics appeared unassailable until it encountered the reality of jungle warfare. Australian Task Force headquarters embraced the scaling concept with a squadron-sized operation that would insert 60 SAS soldiers simultaneously into a landing zone near Long Thang, deep in territory that intelligence reports described as heavily defended enemy base area. The operation represented everything that McConnell's methodology had been designed to avoid: large numbers, predictable insertion patterns, and the kind of conventional thinking that treated the jungle as terrain to be conquered rather than environment to be understood. The insertion began at 0210 hours on a night when low clouds obscured the moon and muffled the sound of helicopter rotors. 12 UH-1 Iroquois helicopters approached the landing zone in formation, their navigation lights extinguished, and pilots relying on terrain features barely visible through night vision goggles. 60 soldiers, 10 times the size of McConnell's normal patrol, prepared to deploy into territory where enemy forces had spent months studying Australian patrol patterns and developing countermeasures specifically designed to exploit large unit vulnerabilities. The squadron split into 12 four-man teams immediately after insertion, following doctrine that assumed smaller elements could achieve the stealth advantages that had made individual patrols so effective. Each team carried standard patrol equipment: M16 rifles, L1A1 SLRs for designated marksmen, Claymore mines for defensive purposes, and radio equipment for coordination with supporting elements. Their mission parameters called for 48 hours of reconnaissance across a grid square that covered 25 square kilometers of jungle canopy, creek beds, and suspected enemy installations. What they discovered at dawn was that the enemy had been waiting. The North Vietnamese forces in the area had analyzed 3 years of Australian patrol reports, studying insertion techniques, movement patterns, and extraction procedures with the methodical attention that professional soldiers devoted to defeating professional enemies. They had constructed a sophisticated deception that exploited every assumption underlying the scaling operation. The enemy had prepared a dummy trail system designed to attract the attention of reconnaissance patrols, complete with fresh footprints, discarded equipment, and other signs of regular use that would convince observers they had discovered an active supply route. More cunningly, they had positioned time-fuse mines along the trail, devices that could be triggered hours after installation, allowing enemy forces to plant explosive devices during darkness and detonate them when patrol schedules suggested maximum Allied presence in the target area. At 0630 hours, as the sun climbed above the jungle canopy and visibility improved enough for detailed observation, 3 of the mines detonated simultaneously. The explosions reverberated through the forest canopy like thunder, sending clouds of smoke and debris spiraling upward through the trees. One four-man team took the full force of a blast that had been positioned with surgical precision at a natural choke point where the dummy trail crossed a creek bed. 2 Australian soldiers died instantly in the explosion, their bodies torn apart by the 100 pounds of explosive packed into artillery shells that the enemy had recovered from failed American fire missions. A third team member disappeared in the chaos that followed, presumably captured by enemy forces who had positioned themselves to exploit the confusion created by the coordinated detonations. The fourth soldier, wounded but conscious, was recovered during the emergency extraction that followed. The captured soldier later reported during debriefing sessions that took place after his eventual release in a prisoner exchange that his captors had shown him propaganda leaflets offering rewards for Australian SS personnel. The documents, printed on cheap paper with smeared ink that suggested hasty production, claimed that 5,000 United States dollars would be paid for each white man delivered dead or alive to specified collection points. Whether the specific dollar amount was accurate remained a matter of debate among intelligence analysts, but the psychological impact was unmistakable. The enemy had decided that Australian reconnaissance patrols represented a threat significant enough to justify extraordinary countermeasures. McConnell received the after-action reports while his own patrol was conducting resupply operations at the forward operating base near Nui Dat. The casualty figures, 2 dead, 1 missing, 1 wounded from a single operation, represented more Australian SAS losses than his unit had suffered in 2 years of individual patrol operations. More troubling than the immediate casualties was the strategic implication. The enemy had learned to predict, intercept, and defeat the tactical innovations that had made the Phantoms of the Jungle so effective. The failure forced a comprehensive review of SAS doctrine that McConnell led, with the kind of systematic analysis that had characterized his approach to jungle warfare from the beginning. The lessons were painful but clear. Scaling up successful small unit tactics did not produce proportionally greater effects. Instead, it created vulnerabilities that sophisticated enemies could exploit using conventional military principles. Large formations generated larger signatures. Predictable patterns created exploitable weaknesses, and time-fused mines represented a level of tactical sophistication that suggested enemy forces were adapting faster than Allied doctrine could evolve. The emotional impact on McConnell's men was immediate and profound. The pride they had built through 28 successful patrols had been replaced by frustration and doubt about whether their methodology could survive contact with an enemy that had studied their techniques and developed specific countermeasures. The jungle that had seemed like their private domain now felt like territory where sophisticated opponents were setting traps designed specifically for phantom hunters. Over the following months, McConnell withdrew his patrols for refit and retraining, using the time to develop modifications that could restore their tactical advantages while accounting for the new reality of enemy countermeasures. The challenge was adapting proven methodology without abandoning the fundamental principles that had made it successful in the first place. The systematic review that McConnell conducted over the following 12 months resembled an autopsy of failed assumptions more than a conventional after-action analysis. Every aspect of SAS patrol doctrine underwent scrutiny that bordered on the obsessive, from insertion techniques that had seemed bulletproof to extraction procedures that had never failed until they encountered an enemy sophisticated enough to exploit predictable patterns. The enemy had demonstrated they could learn, adapt, and counterattack with innovations of their own, forcing McConnell to confront the possibility that tactical superiority was temporary advantage rather than permanent achievement. The lessons emerged with mathematical clarity that left little room for ego or institutional pride. Insertion timing required fundamental revision. Instead of the pre-dawn insertions that had become standard procedure, McConnell's new doctrine called for dusk insertions at 1900 hours, when fading light provided concealment without the predictability that enemy forces had learned to exploit. The change seemed minor until analyzed through the lens of enemy countermeasures. Dawn operations had created patterns that allowed sophisticated opponents to position time-fused mines with deadly precision. Dwell times expanded to reflect the reality that patience remained their primary tactical advantage. Instead of 48-hour patrols that provided sufficient intelligence while minimizing exposure, The new doctrine called for 72-hour operations that forced enemy units to maintain alertness levels that degraded their effectiveness over time. The psychological impact of invisible watchers became more pronounced when those watchers remained in position, long enough to observe complete cycles of enemy activity, from supply runs to guard rotations to the small tactical mistakes that occurred when soldiers believed themselves unobserved. The most significant innovation involved the integration of Overwatch sniper teams equipped with L42A1 7.62mm sniper rifles effective to 600 meters. These four-man teams positioned themselves at elevated terrain features that provided observation over primary patrol areas, creating overlapping fields of fire that could suppress enemy counter-reconnaissance efforts. The snipers carried specialized equipment that included telescopic sights, range-finding equipment, and communications gear that maintained contact with patrol elements operating in their sectors. Acoustic sensors represented a technological advancement that transformed how patrols gathered intelligence about enemy movement patterns. M60 differential microphone pods, devices roughly the size of a paperback book, could be positioned along suspected infiltration routes where they detected footsteps, vehicle movement, and conversation at ranges up to 500 meters. The sensors transmitted data to patrol radio operators who could analyze sound signatures to determine the size, direction, and probable composition of enemy formations moving through their area of operations. Communications improvements focused on reducing the coordination delays that had complicated previous operations. New protocols established direct radio links between patrols and UH-1 helicopter crews, eliminating the intermediate command layers that had caused targeting errors and extraction delays. Helicopter crews practiced treetop insertions at 120 knots, reducing exposure time during the vulnerable moments when aircraft were within range of enemy small arms fire. Extraction procedures were refined to achieve completion in under 2 minutes from initial radio contact to wheels-up departure from the landing zone. The results of these innovations became apparent as patrol rates increased throughout 1970. Enemy casualties continued to mount while Australian losses remained minimal, confirming that the fundamental methodology remained sound despite temporary setbacks. The Australian SAS maintained their remarkable record of losing only one man to enemy fire during the entire Vietnam deployment, a statistical achievement that defied conventional understanding of combat effectiveness in jungle warfare. McConnell's final patrol began in July 1971 with the confidence that came from 3 years of tactical refinement and technological improvement. His 6-man team inserted into the same general area where earlier patrols had encountered sophisticated enemy countermeasures. But now they carried equipment and employed techniques that reflected every lesson learned through painful experience. The insertion occurred at dusk, following terrain features that avoided previously used landing zones while maintaining radio contact with Overwatch snipers positioned on ridge lines 2 kilometers to the north. The 72-hour mission demonstrated how innovation could restore tactical advantages that enemies had temporarily neutralized. The patrol established observation posts that overlooked a supply depot that enemy forces had constructed in a valley between 2 steep ridges, believing the location provided security from aerial reconnaissance. For 3 days, McConnell's team recorded enemy activity with methodical precision, documenting guard schedules, supply deliveries, and the construction of additional storage bunkers that suggested the facility represented a major logistics node. The strike came on the morning of August 8, 1971, when intelligence analysis confirmed that the depot contained significant quantities of ammunition and medical supplies destined for enemy units operating throughout the region. Coordination between the patrol, Overwatch snipers, and helicopter gunships achieved the kind of precision that had eluded earlier operations. The attack destroyed the supply depot completely, killed 17 enemy soldiers according to post-strike reconnaissance, and eliminated a logistics capability that had supported enemy operations across multiple provinces. McConnell's extraction occurred without incident, the culmination of a mission that validated every aspect of the refined doctrine his unit had developed. As the UH-1 Iroquois lifted off from the landing zone with its cargo of successful soldiers and valuable intelligence, he reflected on how the jungle had indeed been transformed into their sensor grid and strike grid. The enemy had learned to counter their initial techniques, but they had learned to counter the enemy's counters, creating a cycle of adaptation that favored the side with superior training, equipment, and institutional support for innovation. The transition from emotional devastation to tactical vindication represented more than personal redemption for McConnell and his men. It demonstrated that military effectiveness required continuous adaptation rather than rigid adherence to successful formulas. The Phantoms of the Jungle had earned their reputation through innovation under fire, not through superior firepower or overwhelming numbers. The enemy's attempt to place bounties on their heads, whether the $5,000 figure was accurate or not, confirmed that psychological warfare was a two-edged sword that could be turned against sophisticated opponents who believed that conventional countermeasures could neutralize unconventional tactics.